All right. Welcome to part two of a three-part Conversations with Drivers driver support series. I'm your host and driver advocate, Lamar Sullivan. And in this spinoff, I'll be talking to another driver support person, someone that you all know. He handles our webinars. He handles the driver adjustment process. And you probably had an interaction with him in your time if you've been driving with us long enough. So we're going to be talking to Jimmy. How you doing, Jimmy?
Oh, pretty good. Yeah, loving it today. Thanks.
Good. Thanks for joining us today. So let's get into some questions. So first, just like tell us about yourself. Just tell us, about your background. What kind of brought you to dispatch.
Yeah. So let's see. I was raised in Tennessee.
Talk about what you did prior to dispatch and
prior to dispatch.
What brought you to dispatch.
Sure. So I was raised in Tennessee. My history there was in music. I taught high school music, and I was involved in a lot of performing from high school on there. Back around 1999, I moved to Seattle and worked there for 20 years for the University of Washington, and also continued to do a lot of musical performing and conducting and things like that. Was lucky enough to sing with some with a jazz band and just some really fun activities like that. It's fantastic out there. So I guess about 8 years ago, moved to Kansas City to be closer to both sides of my family, because my in-laws are about 4 or 5 hours north and my parents are about 4 or 5 hours south, and we were able to be closer to them as they're getting older. And then we have nieces and nephews who are growing up, and we wanted to be a part of their lives before they flew the coop. So we decided to come back this way.
Okay. So that sounds like an interesting kind of pivot to kind of what you're doing now. How did you get from, being a teacher and doing music and that kind of thing to working at dispatch?
Yeah, that was pretty interesting. When I left the University of Washington, my goal was to sort of semi-retire. So when we got to Kansas City, I was looking for something to do part-time. And since I'd spent, many years working behind a desk, I wanted to do something that was just kind of out and about. So I started looking for driving opportunities. One of my big hobbies is I'm a gearhead. I love cars and I love reading about them and shopping for them and stuff like that. So I looked for an opportunity to drive, and I put a resume out, and dispatch actually reached out to me. I'm in Kansas City, and the Kansas City market was the second market that dispatch launched in. So they were looking for drivers to help launch the market, working part-time. So I took them up on it, came in and drove a company van and did deliveries around the Kansas City area for about a year and a half. Then the company exploded, and we expanded into multiple markets, and they were looking for driver support team members and recruited me into work full-time. So I've been part of the team ever since.
Nice. And so what was it like working in kind of those beginning stages when, Kansas City, the second market? Like, I'm sure it was not as dynamic. That wasn't as dynamic at that point, or that's before I even started working at dispatch. So what was that like in those beginning stages?
It was really interesting. Over that year and a half, we started without a whole lot of orders to begin with, and the manager that was running the Kansas City market was actively out trying to recruit business with a small group of drivers. So one of the things that we would do is we would get banks of flyers and cards, and we would just spend our downtime when we didn't have a delivery going around and just plugging to local businesses that we had a new delivery service, and we would get some incentives for, if someone returned the call back to the sales team and got in. Well, within just a couple of months, everything just went on fire. Like we had more deliveries than we could do, and we started to have to reach out and expand and get more drivers. So 6 months into that process, we were doing deliveries all day. I remember having 12-hour days where we would start deliveries at 7 o'clock in the morning and wouldn't finish the deliveries until 7 at night. So we really, when the market kicked up, it really kicked up strong. And we've had a really good and strong Kansas City market ever since, as well as all of the other markets that we've expanded to.
Yeah. So what was it like for you going from being a driver out there on the road and kind of doing that type of stuff to shifting to the driver support behind a desk? And I know you said you didn't want to do behind the desk at first, and now you're back in that position. So what
it was pretty funny. After about a year and a half of driving and then over some of that time, I managed the Kansas City small driver pool. But what I did enjoy being active and out and driving like that. And there's a lot of times I still miss that. But what I did find is that I fell in love with dispatch. So the opportunity to continue growing with the company and creating a kind of a seat for myself within this growing and really cool business attracted me to stick around and to dive back in. Part of it was the leadership of the company is just amazing, and they were interesting and energetic and smart. And the team, I noticed that everyone that they attracted to the company was just fantastic. And so it was just really a pleasure to work with the team members that we were accumulating over time. So as we started with a small support team that eventually grew, it was just a great place to be and a great team to work with. And so it's always been a positive experience. And so I was just really happy to dive in with both feet, going for shifting. Part of the reason I shifted is because we started part-time, but then the deliveries grew so fast that we all had to start putting in full-time hours to get the deliveries done. Mm-hmm. So by then I was used to it, and that was fine. But I did enjoy the transition. And part of the enjoyment of it is that I know what it's like to be on the road. So I feel like I can offer some unique support to drivers out there because I spent, a year and a half with feet on the ground and behind the wheel doing the deliveries myself.
Okay. And so, like you said, you were retired before, and now you're in this whole second part of your career. What's that been like? Did you expect to be in this position of a second career when you kind of jumped into dispatch, or were you just kind of thinking, oh, I'll just kind of do this on the side?
It was almost kind of fate, because the way dispatch is set up, I'm able to work from home. And a lot of people did that, transition to that over COVID. But I had actually transitioned before the pandemic hit. So I was working remotely and working full-time from home, helping to train drivers, recruit drivers, fill orders. So it was already in my system by the time all that started. And then it just turned out to be a great opportunity. It keeps me busy. It's exciting. Again, the team members that I work with, I like. So I just, there was nothing else I wanted to do that would have reduced the amount of time I spent. And because I had the flexibility of, remote work, if I needed to travel to help family with anything, I could take the work with me and work from there. So part of the big draw to dispatch has been the flexibility to sort of, exist as a full-time employee, but also have some flexibility if I'm needed, if I need to be somewhere else or I need to travel or something like that. They offered me a lot of flexibility to meet the needs I had for a full-time job. So it was sort of a win-win.
Okay. That sounds good. And so what traits do you think make a good driver support rep?
Well, from my end, having the experience helped a lot, because I had to kind of learn the tech side, from that point forward. But having the experience of being on the road was very helpful, as my job required recruiting new drivers. So I knew what to tell them. I knew what it was like. I knew what they were in for. I knew what the possibilities could be. So experience was good. communication skills, first and foremost. You've got to be able to relay ideas. With my background in education, I've been able to work. I mean, the biggest part of my job for the longest time was training new drivers, and now I'm hosting regular webinars where we impart new information and gather feedback, and it's very much like an educational or classroom setting. So those skills that I had from years in the classroom were just a natural help with what I'm doing here. So those were some good strengths. Yeah, so communication skills verbally, also in writing, because we do a lot of messaging and emailing and stuff back and forth. So the ability to relay information clearly, understand the point of view of the learner or the person on the other side, and then having a passion for people, I think. So one of the strongest things we get to do is be a driver's advocate. And that can be a challenge at times when you can't always say yes to every question, but you work hard to strive to advocate for the drivers as much as you possibly can.
For sure, and the drivers really appreciate from the people on the inside. For sure. And so you kind of answered my next two questions. So let's skip ahead here. So why do you think drivers trust you, particularly when they go to you? And at times drivers will request Jimmy, like, hey, can I talk to Jimmy or whatever? Like, why do you think drivers trust you?
I would imagine that for the drivers that's sometimes a challenge. We have limited resources and limited amount of time we can spend with each driver, with thousands of drivers on the board. So I would say first and foremost, they know my face. If they've come to a webinar, they know who I am. So they feel like if they can reach out to me directly, then we have a personal connection and that I can work to solve the problems. So that's a big plus. I also try to succinctly respond to driver requests with as much concise information as possible, so that at the end of a transaction or a conversation, they're not left hanging with questions. So even though I might have to field, hundreds of questions at a time, I try to get the questions answered as thoroughly and succinctly and quickly as possible. One of the things is, facing lists of questions that have come in through our chat or through emails. You want to move through them so that the driver's issues get resolved, but you also want to provide as clear information as possible. So hopefully my ability to answer questions as concisely as possible without leaving the drivers with any further questions, and trying to be diligent about every follow-up, even though, things slip through the cracks. And for that, we're sorry, but we work very hard to be sure everything gets answered and driver issues get solved quickly as possible.
For sure. And one thing I will add to that I think I see is your empathy, your ability to understand where drivers might be coming from on a particular issue, whether that's in the webinar and the adjustment process. And I always say, like, giving them an answer, whether it's the answer they want to hear or not, just giving them like you said, a succinct answer is all they're looking for. And I think that goes a long way for you building that trust with them as well.
Yeah. I mean, we have rules we have to follow, but that doesn't mean that we can't advocate for the driver's needs as much as possible.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So how does it feel when drivers shout you and the team out?
Yeah, you know what? I will be 100% honest that it's really exciting. When you're in the everyday grind and you're working through stuff all of it, it's surprising how much it makes you feel good to just get a 2-second shout out, just for somebody to say, thank you for doing that for me, or I appreciate your patience working this out. That those things do mean a lot, because as with any job or with any situation, you can get kind of bogged down, in the churn of everything. So just having a little something like that, it does mean a lot. And we feel like we know that it means the same thing to the drivers because they're out there, working as hard as we are. So we try to offer that as much as we can while we're doing our jobs as well. So yeah, it's always appreciated.
Good. Yeah, I love to show you guys whenever I'm doing these types of interviews and I hear that from a driver or someone calling you guys out. I want to make sure that you guys know about it because I know like the day-to-day can get a little stressful at times. So, it's something to keep you guys going of like the drivers really do recognize the hard work that you're doing or you're trying to solve their issues. And so, yeah, I think that goes a long way. And I love every time they shout you guys out. So what do you enjoy most about your day-to-day work as a support person?
Probably the ability to solve. So something that I tend to be a little boxes type of person. So I like to check those boxes off down the road. And part of what I do, I manage inboxes so that anytime drivers reach out to us, either through email or through the chat system or by phone, I'm deeply involved in that. Also with the adjustments and with any driver issues that arise. So my day is pretty much, streaming in little boxes of things that you can do. And I like the satisfaction of being able to punch every one of those things complete. It matches my personality type and I enjoy it. Part of having been with dispatch as long as I have is that I have a base of knowledge where I can quickly and easily usually solve problems or get the person with an issue to the right place to solve that problem. So there's a lot to be said for having been around a long time because I can just click through stuff and yeah, I know the answer to that. Yeah, I know exactly or yes, I know exactly what that situation might be like out on the road. So let's solve it this way.
Mm-hmm.
And it tends to lend to the solutions being more meaningful. So I do enjoy that part, is knowing by the end of the day, I have gotten these things accomplished and I've helped, set things in a row so that this, we continue moving to satisfy the customer. So.
That's great. That's great. So what makes some orders harder to troubleshoot than others?
On our end, what we see is sometimes there's not enough information and we work really hard with the customers. Dispatch we don't enter the orders ourselves. The customers enter the orders by hand themselves every day. So, but they may not always know what it's like from the driver's point of view to see an order. In their mind, they're probably pick up at A, drop off at B, done, and that's just a small part of what they're doing. But to the driver, having detailed information is golden. So probably one of the toughest things is striving to get as much information as possible to the driver. So a lot of times we intercede if the customer, if there's more information the customer has that would help make the delivery process go more smoothly. Yeah, that I would imagine that across the board, that's probably the most important thing, is just to be sure the drivers have the information they need, to get the delivery done smoothly. And again, our whole team, we're usually in the middle of something that falls in that window all day long.
Yeah, the either not enough information or confusing information in the notes, like those other two.
Terrifying. Yeah,
for sure. So what's something about the adjustments process that drivers don't realize when you're deciding to accept or deny?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. And I was sort of thinking along those lines this week. And one of the things that is probably not as apparent to the drivers is if we want to be sure that all the drivers are compensated fairly for everything that they do, which is why we have increases in earnings if there's heavier weight, if there's requests for inside delivery. What we need to process that is clear documentation. as a for instance, if a customer hands you a pallet full of full of boxes, but they've only listed 100 pounds on the order, odds are that we need to revise that to be sure that you're compensated fairly for the amount. But we can't determine the weight increase by a photograph. So one of the things that we need from the drivers is proactive assistance with documentation. So if you're at a pickup location and you have a delivery that you anticipate will need an adjustment, ask the customer for a bill of lading or for documentation on what the weight might be, or maybe if it's item numbers or something that may not be dictated in the order. That way we have the proof that we need to be sure that you're credited correctly, that the customers are charged appropriately, and move on from there. It just slows down the process if we have to go back to the customer to get proof after the fact. It's a much longer process that way than it is if by just simply asking the customers a question at the pickup, or reaching out to us through the intercom and just saying, I believe that this order weight might be inaccurate. Is there a way to check with the customer on that? We can stop what we're doing and change that on the spot. So I would just say proactively, be sure that we get the documentation that we need. The biggest thing with adjustments is we're looking for proof. We're looking for correct documentation. If it's wait time, when did you arrive and swipe, and when did you depart and swipe? If it's weight, do you have something that shows us the weight of those items? So the best drivers in the adjustment process always strive to provide us the details we need.
That's good. That's good information. And so what do you say to drivers when they tell you, this customer doesn't want to provide their bill of lading, or I have no way to get the weight for this order? What do you say to that?
Well, if they're contacting us at the moment that it occurs at the pickup location, when they see the items, we can make a phone call to the customer and just right there on the spot. Unfortunately, if it happens after the fact, if it happens the next day when we receive the adjustment form and there's been no outreach to us or to the customer, and there's no proof on the delivery item, all we can do is to attempt to contact the customer for an update. And 99% of the time, the customers are happy to say, oh yeah, I'm sorry, but that was a 500-pound order instead of a 200-pound order. But in the event that we can't reach the customer, they don't return our call, they don't provide proof, it really becomes a case-by-case basis. And there have been instances where we've just had to educate the drivers that, at this point, there's really nothing we can do. The earnings were clear when you picked up the order, and we've tried to proactively instruct you to reach out to us as early as possible. But for next time, here are the steps the best practice steps you can take to be sure that you're compensated fairly.
For sure. And that seems fair when you can't, when the driver can't get the information, we can't get the information. It's kind of is what it is at that point, right?
Yep, absolutely. And we don't like it to end like that, but unfortunately it does from time to time.
Yeah. Okay. So what's a common challenge that you hear from drivers when they're chatting in, and how do you usually solve it?
Oh gosh. For my end with the driver issues, a lot of times it's just it kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier. It's just not enough information. Probably the challenge is they'll have an address that's incomplete, or drivers will have an address that maybe is wrong in the system, because it's South Johnson Drive instead of North Johnson Drive. Those typos are very easy to make in the system, and customers are often in a hurry entering in their order, so those things can happen. So I think clarity of information may be the toughest challenge. I'll give you another, for instance. If dispatch has a policy change, or we need to get information out to the drivers, we have limited way of getting the information out to the drivers. So we might host a webinar and try to address new policies so that we're sure our drivers are educated. We might put the information into one of our newsletters. We might also go so far as to push out the information into a notification on the app itself. But it's very easy, and especially when you're busy, to see a pop-up like that and just flip through and go. So on our end, I think one of the challenges is getting important information in the hands of the drivers as quickly and as thoroughly as possible. That can be a little bit of a challenge. Not every driver can stop for a webinar. Not every driver can stop and read, but we do encourage you to take a minute with the newsletters and look. There may be some information that's very relevant to you there.
Well, I can fully relate to that. Actually, today I was asking Brendan about, how the new adjustment forms process has been going. He's like, I think some people either missed it or didn't read it. And I'm like, well, it's kind of impossible to miss it when it like pops up immediately when you go onto the app. So, getting people to like actually care about the information that we're sending out and actually read it is definitely an ongoing struggle. But the drivers that are the most active, the drivers that care the most, they do read everything, and that's what they should say to us in our webinars and in these top driver forums is, we read everything and we want all the information. And so that's encouraging to hear at times when I'm like, are the drivers even going to read this if I send this out?
Yeah, I mean, if there's any sort of advice I would give to drivers is that most of the time, almost all the time, we send something out special, whether it's in a newsletter, a webinar, or a post in the app. There's usually a really good reason why we're posting that information out there, because we don't want to waste your time. But we do want to be sure that you have all the pertinent information to continue to be successful. So we would please do take a moment and just look at those posts, stop and scan over that newsletter to see if anything is important enough that it could affect your deliveries on a day-to-day basis. And it usually is. I mean, if it's anything from changes to just suggestions about how to make your driving experience better, we always try to be helpful with those sort of things. So take a few minutes and read.
Yeah, for sure. Any memorable driver support stories that you can share, good or bad?
Well, we have, that's an interesting question because we've had some of both. You know what I mean? We've had some had some tragedies, and we have to remember that drivers are people, and we're out there in a busy world, and but on the upside of that is probably one of the most memorable events is getting to come and meet the drivers in person. I've gotten to do that in two ways. One is when we were when I was doing market specific training for Kansas City, I used to meet the drivers in person for training. So we would meet up. We were much smaller then, and we would meet up and review how the app worked and talked about best practices and give the drivers a chance to ask questions and stuff. And it really was fun and meaningful to get to sit one-on-one. But we also have been recently hosting events where those of us that are more in contact with the drivers have gotten to meet some of our drivers in person, even now, and traveling across the country to go to events that were sponsored to try to meet the drivers. And that's extremely meaningful to put a face with the name while you guys are out there delivering, and get some, FaceTime, getting some real feedback and some appreciation, and, seeing that there are humans on both ends of the spectrum. It means a lot.
For sure. I get a lot out of those events too. And that's one of my favorite parts of the job, is just getting to talk to the drivers in person and kind of humanizing them, humanizing ourselves, and just kind of getting to know them personally, kind of outside of their vehicles. It's really nice to do that. So what advice would you give to drivers from a support perspective?
First and foremost, and this is just from fielding driver issues that come in regarding deliveries, Um, Try not to get in such a hurry that you're not reading the details. A lot of problems could be solved in advance by taking just one extra second look at that order, whether it's the customer requested drop-off time or pickup time, or the location detail, suite number, or perhaps it's the note that the customer put in about where delivery items might be picked up or how to reach the drop-off location when you arrive. Sometimes they'll say, give the drop-off location a call 20 minutes before you arrive to alert them that you're coming. Well, that in itself, a 2-minute phone call would save you, tons of time in the long run at the delivery location if you follow the instructions. So the other side of the coin, when we work with customers to provide as much information as possible, is to ask the drivers to be sure that you're looking for that information. And then secondly, the whole team is here to support you. So reach out, email us for non-urgent issues, jump into the chat in the app for urgent issues or things that are more timely, and let us know there, how we can help solve your issue. We know that sometimes it would be a lot easier for you just to click a phone number and reach out directly to a person, but the driver to staff ratio can't always allow for us to have a person available for every single phone call. But if we're fielding multiple chats and solving your issues through the intercom system, we can work a lot faster, and you can get a lot more personalized help through that intercom system, which is why we put that into place a while back, and it's turned out to be a lot more successful. The only other thing I would suggest is we do appreciate your patience when we're working to find solutions, because we understand how difficult it can be to be out in the middle of the traffic and the road and the weather and the customer issues and tugging and lugging delivery items around. We also are at times facing multiple delivery issues and orders and challenges at the same time as well. So if it takes us just a little bit of extra time to get back with the solution, especially if it's a non-urgent issue, just know that we have your information and we're working to circle back to it as fast as we can. So every one of our team members works very hard to be as follow-up oriented as possible. So even if we don't get an instant answer, know that we're still thinking about you and trying to dig back to that as fast as we can.
Sure, for sure. That's well said. And so that brings us to our last question here. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience, whether that's, anything to the drivers or just about being a support person or anything?
I would probably say I've worked in a lot of industries and I've done a lot of different types of jobs, and stick with dispatch. This is an amazing opportunity. This is something that you don't see come along every day. A business with the heart and the intelligence and the drive and all of the things that have helped dispatch to grow into this amazingly successful national business in a very short amount of time. Are there growing pains? Absolutely. That would be the same anywhere you go. But the team, the leadership, the driver, you guys, the driver pool, everyone that I work with on a regular basis are amazing. This is a unique opportunity, and it's a bright light. It's a bright light. Dispatch is a bright light. It's energetic. It's burning beautifully. It's a well-oiled machine, and if you're part of it, you're part of something really special from the top down. It's really unique type of business, a unique opportunity, and for those of us that have gotten to experience it, we're really lucky to be a part of a business that does things as well as dispatch does.
That's very well said, and I would say that kind of echoes what a driver said pretty recently of, they feel that dispatch is it feels like a family oriented vibe here. It doesn't feel corporate. And that kind of goes to what you just said of, it's a very special, it kind of comes around once. And I feel that way as well, as someone that's worked here for close to 6 years it very much feels that way for me. So to hear you say that, to hear a driver say that, we're hearing that on both sides, that's really cool to hear.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure.
Good. Well, thank you, Jimmy, for joining us. That's going to end this episode of Conversations with Driver Support series. And any last goodbyes?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, drivers, for working so hard for us. And thank you, Dispatch, for being what it is. It's been fantastic. And thank you, Lamar, for doing these fantastic interviews and spending this time.
No problem. Thank you for joining us. And we'll see you guys next time on the next Conversation with Drivers.